An Iranian official says around 2,000 people, including security personnel, have died after more than 2 weeks of protests across the country. It's the first time authorities have acknowledged the high death toll following an intense crackdown on demonstrations. Videos on social media show bodies in a morgue on the outskirts of capital Tehran and people trying to identify the deceased. Iran has eased some restrictions, allowing for the first time in days overseas phone calls. Texting, though, is still not possible. Internet use is also severely curbed, although some witnesses say they see access to government-approved websites. Authorities had imposed a complete curb on communications last Thursday. The Iranian foreign minister says the shutdown was ordered to address, quote, terrorist operations, but rights groups say the blackout was imposed to prevent news spreading of that rising death toll. The US president has imposed tariffs on Iran's trading partners to put pressure on Tehran, but he's also been weighing several other options, including military strikes. Simon Marks is covering this story for CNN Live from Washington, D.C. Simon, those many options that Mr. Trump has been laying out the last few days, the National Security Team expected to meet today to look at those options.
Yes, well, there's a whole range of options that are being presented to him. And I think, Wei-Su, it's important to underscore that his own rhetoric has shifted dramatically even since the 2nd of January, when he warned Iran that US forces were locked and loaded and would intervene militarily in the event that peaceful protesters were killed by the Iranian regime. Now, of course, with reports of that rising death toll, President Trump sounding a little vaguer about exactly what he's planning to do. We know that he's reviewing options to strike Iran, pinprick tactical strikes that might target security service personnel that the United States deems have been directly involved in the alleged brutalization of protesters. But we also know he's looking at a range of other options, including covert actions in Iran, non-military actions in Iran, diplomatic engagement, and upping in the amount of information that reaches Iran from private television satellite operations out on the West Coast in California, and possibly even from his somewhat mothballed Voice of America operation. It's notable that VOA Farsi, the network's Persian service, is still operating and beaming its messages towards Iran. So President Trump, I think, mindful of advice that he's received from some strategists that launching a military strike right now could end up playing into the hands of the regime and emboldened its argument that the protesters on the streets of Iran are, as it claims, agents of American power. So a big decision that President Trump has to make and a lot to weigh up.
All right. Meanwhile, Mr. Trump has already turned to a favored tool, and that is, of course, tariffs. 25% tariffs on any country doing business with Tehran. No countries named specifically, and no details beyond this will be immediately implemented.
You know, well, I mean, this announcement was made, it was a surprise. It was made over his social media platform. It was imprecise in terms of what he announced, simply across the board, a 25% tariff on any country doing business with Iran. He described it as final and conclusive, although I think there will be likely legal challenges to this, because it's far from evident that he has the power simply to make that announcement without congressional approval. But we know that on the face of it, this would target major trading partners of Iran, including China, which has increased the amount of Iranian oil that it has been purchasing over the last year. And this raises big questions about the future of bilateral trade discussions between the United States and Beijing. It will also target Turkey, a NATO ally of the United States heavily, which does a lot of business with Iran, and also the United Arab Emirates. But but there's a host of smaller business ties that are two-way arrangements. India, for example, South Africa, a whole range of countries that do business with Iran, and they will all be wondering the extent to which this 25% tariff is going to apply to them if it is ever actually rolled out. Because again, the chance that this is going to face legal challenges is, I think, pretty substantial.
Oh, thanks for that. Simon Marks covering this story for CNA from Washington, D.C. Well, India, not one of the largest trade partners to Iran, but it is listed as one of the larger trading partners. Neha Pune watching developments for CNA live from New Delhi. Neha, how much trade does India actually do with Iran? And would this, Simon Marks is saying, whether these tariffs actually go through is another question. But should they, the fact that they are raised at all, would that put pressure on ongoing trade talks between the US and India on reaching a deal that would cut tariffs on Indian exports into the United States?
Absolutely, and that's the concern, because this trade deal that India and US have been negotiating for nearly a year now has been hanging in the balance, with us repeatedly being told that it's, just a few days away from being signed. But even as that claim is being made by officials on both sides, you have the American president now, announcing more tariffs, which would essentially take the cumulative tariffs against India to about a 75%, which would be among the highest rates levied against any nation in the world. India has already been penalized 50%, 25% for trade tariffs, and a 25% penalty fee, as the president called it, for buying cheap Russian oil. But as this stands, India's engagement with Iran, especially on the trade front, had been declining since 2019, when US sanctions were reimposed. Trade volumes have shrunk by 87% between 2019 and 2024, numbers going down from 17 billion in bilateral trade to about 2 billion in 2024. Oil used to be the main commodity that India imported, but that's no longer the case. It's mostly, chemicals, fruits and nuts. These make up about 80% of what India imports from Iran. And as far as exports to Iran are concerned, they've also been falling, going from about $5 billion to $1 billion as of 2024. It's mostly, agricultural goods, basmati rice, tea, sugar, some pharmaceuticals as well. The bigger impact, of course, is going to be felt on India's investments in Iran, particularly the Chabahar port, which gave, New Delhi access to Afghanistan as well as Central Asia, allowed it to bypass Pakistan entirely, with which it's had historically tense ties. But, here in New Delhi, there is unease over what has been announced, because what's becoming increasingly clear as President Trump, finishes his first year in office of his second term, is the fact that the US government will continue to weaponize trade to push foreign policy through, irrespective of, the cost that this may come at for partner countries. And this is also coming at a time when you have the new US ambassador to India, Sergio Gore, saying just on Monday that, New Delhi is an essential partner for Washington, D.C. But clearly there's, a difference between what institutional messaging is like from the US and what the message from the White House looks like for New Delhi.
So Neha Pune, they're reporting with CNA live from New Delhi.